Welcome to PhD with Women on It Hack the Future. My name is Beata Young, and today's PhD Positivity Hack Delivered will be by our guest Rachel Kowert. Topic: How video games can be beneficial to your mental health. Episode 70 starts here. Let me remind you, this is a grassroots community that focuses on women on IT, an inclusive forum of women in technology, startups, and female leaders who are supported by men as well. And I bring heart to that hustle because empathy is my mojo. And empathy is critical when you're researcher on the uses and effects of digital games. I would like to mention a couple of interesting topics today. At the beginning, I would like to tell you that it's great news, everyone. There is a Google Startup School in India that will enable 10,000 startups in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. It's time for us to hack the future with Ada Developers Academy, a free Seattle coding school for women and gender diverse adults. Congratulations to Marina Wisnowska on becoming the second woman to win International Mathematics Union Fields Medal, a very esteemed award in the field of mathematics that is often compared to Nobel Prize. And we were celebrating Mathematics Day just last week, Mathematics 2.0. In today's episode, we are going to learn how video games can be beneficial to your mental health. Video games can be a cheap, accessible form of entertainment that can be enjoyed by everyone and can be beneficial to your mental health. It's easy to get sucked into the world of video games. What many people don't realize is that playing video games can also be great for your brain. Mental health issues can affect anyone at any time, but some people may find that playing video games can help them cope with their problems and feelings in a healthy way. Researchers from Lero, the Science Foundation Ireland Research Center for Software, looked at earlier studies and found evidence that video games could help alleviate symptoms of depression, such as the loss of pleasure. For this Positivity Hack Delivered, we are joined by a world-renowned researcher on the uses and effects of digital games, Rachel Kowert, Ph.D. So it's a double PhD, 70, and our guest, PhD holder, is a research psychologist and the research director of Take This. She's also an award-winning author, has published a variety of books and scientific articles relating to the psychology of games and, more recently, the relationship between games and mental health specifically. In 2021, Dr. Kowert was chosen as a member of the Game Awards Future class, representing the best and brightest of the future of video games. She has been featured in various media outlets, including NPR, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Atlantic Wired, and the list goes on and on. So, Rachel, tell us, where in the world are you today?
I am at home in Ottawa, Canada.
Beautiful location. What's the weather like? It doesn't look that warm.
It is actually. I'm wearing a sweater just because it looks good on camera. It's warm. It's summer. It's a good 27, 28 degrees today.
Yes, and you got rid of your kids. You're having a very quiet environment. We had a prep call and we had a little toddler grabbing your attention.
Yes. Yes, I have lots of children, but they're all in summer camp, so it's great.
It's great time when children are away. We can behave badly and play video games. Do you play video games often?
I wouldn't say often. I do play games. I love playing games. But I have all my children are under 7, so they require a lot of time and attention, and I also have a job, so not as much as I would like, but I do have a soft spot in my heart for them.
It's great to hear. Hopefully you will mention some names we are not going to reveal right now. But look, today I read actually very interesting article because I was preparing for the topic of bias in technology. And since we are talking about games, it was very interesting to hear about Xbox problems because they were preparing to launch their games, and one of the developers decided to test this game at home with her kids and family. And it turned out that the game was not recognizing her children because the artificial intelligence only was tested on adults, and majority of them were white males. So maybe not the greatest topic to start when you want to keep the healthy balance, but can you tell us what is your objective when you do a research on healthy benefits for gameplay?
Yeah, I really come from kind of a game positive perspective. I want to reduce trepidation that parents or people who just aren't familiar with games may have when it comes to talking about finding a healthy balance in games. I mean, my kind of research disposition has always sort of been to kind of tease out fact from fiction. It grew out of the stereotypes of gamers being seen as kind of these antisocial, overweight, aggressive kind of community of people. And as a gamer my entire life, it's like I hadn't seen that as being the truth about people who play games. So my research work always started with like, is this true? And is that a valid concern that playing games is going to make someone overweight and antisocial? And now today, when I talk with my work at Take This and the work I do, the advocacy work I do on YouTube, it's all about bringing that information to outside of the research community in a way that is meant to reduce fear and kind of provide some clarity about what games are and what they aren't and what role they have in our lives and how we can find that healthy balance.
It's interesting that people like to complexify and scare others about social media, about games having bad effect. So your positive outcomes, what are the three major outcomes of playing games that are very positive?
Oh, there's so many. Social connection is probably number one. You know, the stereotype of gamers has always been they're kind of like these antisocial activities that are sought after by antisocial people, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Games are incredibly social. So I would say social connection, along with that, like a reduced sense of loneliness, all those positive social benefits. Another one would be, you know, games and learning. We learn a lot of things from playing games, and it's not just playing the games that are intended to teach us things. Like when I was a kid, I played those math games where like equations would show up on the screen and you would like shoot them with your spaceship. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about games that we want to play, you know, games like Civilization teach us about world history, or, you know, MMORPGs can teach us about leadership and resource management, that sort of stuff. So there's a wealth of things that can be learned from playing games. And I guess the third one would be stress relief. Games are fun. It's like you said, a lot of times people kind of put games in this like side black box, like it's something totally different. At the end of the day, it's just another way to have fun, and fun is important throughout the lifespan, especially for stress release. So those would be my top three.
Fun is important throughout your lifespan. So I like that quotation, Rachel. We have a couple of gamers I can see here. Jane is saying, hello, Beata and Rachel. Looking forward for today's topic. And I see also Leszek Król, who is actually the creator of University of Games. He's a great predecessor for many great games developed in Poland. He used to be part of our mentors network back in Poland, and he's also the co-founder of my company, Hansea Tech. Great to hear, Leszek. I am looking forward, and Jane, bring your questions, or just start with telling us what's your favorite game. Absolutely good. What's your favorite game, Rachel?
My favorite game ever would be Final Fantasy VI. I love role-playing games where you can just kind of get lost in a character and experience some kind of like fantastical world. My favorite game at the moment is Pokemon Go. And we talked about this before because I play it with my 7-year-old and she loves it. What about you?
Well, it used to be Pokemon Go. Now because I am trying to kind of limit myself to from the addiction, I'm trying to play different games that actually help with my memory. So that's more kind of, okay, I better stop that because it's too addictive. Something that is boring enough not to hook me into it, but also quite motivating because I know the outcome is good for my brain and good for my health. So we talked about the impact of games in children and also adults, how they can be beneficial. One of the things I want to ask you is, how do you keep the healthy balance? Is there a way to keep the healthy balance between being addicted but also knowing not to overstep the boundaries on not playing more than half a day?
Yeah, I mean, it is a balance, which I think is the key word, and it's not necessarily about a specific time limit. It's about the way that games are being used in your daily life. So it's summer now here. My children happen to be at camp this week, but when they're not at camp, my 7-year-old loves Minecraft, and she's definitely playing more Minecraft during the day than she was, say, during the school year. But for me, it's like, okay, she has more free time. She's playing with her friends across the street. Her cousins are playing with her. It's a real social kind of interactive activity for her. And that's great. Do I still limit it? Yes. You don't want, too much eye strain or, too much sedentary activities. But it's about the balance. So is she also playing across the street? Is she also going swimming? Is she also sleeping enough? So I think that you just have to think, what role is it playing? And if it's playing a role that is becoming problematic in your life, if it's overtaking all other activities that you're doing, then maybe it's time to step back and think about, okay, what is actually being fulfilled by playing these games? And maybe I should see if I can seek that in other areas of my life.
We have comment from Jane, currently loving farming games, Harvest Moon or Stardew Valley.
Love both of those.
So let me go into your private life. Do you have to check all the games to be able to provide the best research?
I at least watch a playthrough, yes.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
I don't play them all. But like just yesterday, I was watching like a walkthrough of Psychonauts 2, for instance, to catch up on that.
Okay, so you watch like PewDiePie playing something just to get the feel?
Yeah, you go on Twitch, see what people are playing, see what they're doing. Yeah, exactly.
Oh my goodness, I feel so old, Rachel, now. Anyway, my 22 years old daughter, when she was very young, I have to tell you, this is a story that was really heartbreaking. She got hooked into this one game that you play and then you get some rewards for playing, and the more hours you played, the more rewards you got. And there was a community behind it. And it turned out that somebody stole her password, tricked her into giving the password. And I kid you not, I've never seen so devastated kid. I mean, she was crying her eyes out because she lost access and somebody was so malicious. And I had to explain to her that this is just a game and this is nothing to be so upset about. But it was easy for me to tell her, being an adult. How do you cope with your kid who's so addicted that feels like the world is crashing down when something's not going right in the virtual world?
Yeah, it's difficult, I think, and I think again it goes back to understanding what role that the game is playing, because if the virtual world is somebody's social space where they feel a sense of social freedom and where they are able to connect with people who they feel connected to, if maybe they don't, in their immediate space, or if they've, invested a lot of time and effort and energy, into their Stardew Valley farm, which I have. I know that takes a lot of hours. And all of a sudden it's gone. I mean, those emotions are real. I want to bring up a study, which I like to quote. It's not my own, but it's one of my favorite research studies of the last decade. And it was looking at how people felt and experienced the emotions of the death of a fictional character. So this was about Jon Snow in Game of Thrones. And after Jon Snow died in Game of Thrones, they tracked the words that people were using to describe the emotions that they were feeling. And what they found is that people were expressing the same stages of grief that you express when you lose an actual loved one, like anger, despair, regret, like the same stages of grief. And it's like we have these real emotional connections, even if they are fictional world, even if they are virtual worlds. Emotionally, they're not necessarily fictional to us. So I would just say it's easy to see how it's like, oh, well, it's not like in the real world, like it's not, impacting your ability to have a safe place to live or something to eat. But those emotions that they're feeling are very real.
So for somebody who is a creator of games, and I'm sorry if I'm jumping from one topic to the other topic, but for those who are creators of games, what would be your advice how to create a game that has got positive effect on your brain?
Yeah, that's a big question. I would say definitely consult with mental health professionals, consult with psychologists. There are a lot of us who do consulting within the games industry. If you're interested in kind of avoiding what I would call the dark patterns, or actually Dr. Celia Hodent would call them dark patterns. And she's done a whole lot of work on kind of user research and user design that maybe isn't so positive on the people who are playing them and how to avoid those so the outcomes are more positive versus negative. So there are a lot of things to consider, and there's a lot of information and resources out there. So I would just say make sure you're not doing active harm. And if you're wondering, there's lots of consultants out there that you could reach out to.
Great. Well, Rachel is one of them. If you have questions, please do not hesitate to ask it. Now we have Jane is asking, what's your opinion on some games that exploits kids, like Roblox? And I have no idea what's the
Yeah, there was some documentaries coming out about the way that Roblox structures its system. So it's difficult to talk about Roblox as a game because it's not really a game, it's a platform where kids can then use and create content on their platform. So it's kind of like user generated content, but it's largely children who is creating this content that's then like sold on the marketplace in Roblox. I mean, for me, if you do not want your children participating in those kinds of spaces, I think the onus is largely on the parents to prohibit their children from participating in those kinds of spaces. Like for me, my daughter loves Minecraft. I do not let my daughter participate in public Minecraft servers, but I let her have her own private server where we're very clear on who is there and who she's engaging with and who she's interacting with. So I think that for those kinds of environments, if you don't feel comfortable or if it doesn't seem right to you or doesn't sit right with you, for your kids to be engaging in it, it's best for the parents to take the lead in prohibiting that space, because they'll always be there. There'll always be different spaces available, some that you like and some that you don't. And as long as we educate ourselves on what they are and how we can keep our kids, if we want to keep them on them or off them, I think that's up to us.
Right, we talked about various platforms, and it relates as well with all the social media platforms, because we know that Facebook has got some games incorporated within a platform, and with just like any tool, technology is there to help us, to serve us, and it's up to us to use it for social good. So now we talked about the benefits. We talked about how to avoid. Maybe you could talk as a parent. You could give us an advice on how to explain to kids that there are benefits, and you have to be aware of these black spheres of the internet.
Yeah, that's such a hard question. I did actually catch my daughter once on a public Minecraft server talking to people, and that I had a moment, I tell you, when I saw that happening. And I did try to explain to her that, there are people on the internet who are not necessarily kind, just as you would explain a stranger, a situation about how to approach strangers, like in face-to-face environments. You have to tell them, the same is true in gaming spaces, although it's more tricky because you can't see them. Or if somebody says that they're somebody, they could be lying about who they're saying they are. And with young children, it's more difficult because I know their brains can't actually really comprehend this idea of people pretending to be other people, or why would people lie. That really comes later, with age, with being able to take better perspective taking and that sort of thing. So as younger kids, it's all about parental controls. It's all about limiting their access to the spaces they can go. It's all about limiting the access to age appropriate content. It's about limiting their access to be able to spend money. Don't let them spend your money. They'll buy all the loot boxes. They have no impulse control when they're younger. And as they get older, I think it's more about slowly explaining the way the world works. There's bad people everywhere, and that's absolutely true in games as well.
We can talk about actually a very good book proposal that you launched on Kickstarter. We just talked about the fact that you didn't manage to gain funding, but I think it's very interesting content on this book. Not only it talks about invisible friends, so those that you meet on social space, the secret to success, here, there, and everywhere. And you actually made an effort to have it focused on educational aspect, entertaining, and inclusivity. Tell us, why do you think these are important parts of the book?
Yeah, it's so important for people to see themselves as the center of their own stories. And it's interesting because Invisible Friends is about online stranger danger. And I actually wrote it after that incident with my daughter with Minecraft, because I didn't know how to best explain or demonstrate to her that some people on the internet aren't who they say they are, and what the danger is in sharing personal information online. So I wrote the story with children at the center, because we learn the best from people and models who look like us. So children learn a lot more effectively from children than from a lecture from their parents. And so I created this whole series. It's called Tales from Cloud Canyon, that are topical short stories with different lessons for children, taught by children who look like them. I learned that children's books are not very diverse. They're not very inclusive. Girl characters make up less than half the characters in children's stories. And when you start looking at minority populations, the number gets exponentially smaller. So I wanted to create books that kind of celebrate the diversity of the world we live in, and make sure everyone could see themselves as the center of their own story, and with the power to create their own futures. So I did kickstart the books. They didn't meet the goal, but that's okay. They will at some point exist in the world in some form or another.
Oh, absolutely. We keep our fingers crossed for that, Rachel, and we'll keep our audience updated. So we have got a comment from IPOV, and I suspect that's my husband who wants to share a story. I just loved Sid Meier Alpha Centaurus. GP2 by Micro Pros was really the first classic F1 race car sim. Nowadays, my wife stops me playing. Lol. Well, somebody has to be the boss of the household. There you go. Anyway, we've got Agata Bellon. Fascinating discussion, Rachel. Another great guest, Bata. Thank you. I am curious how you feel about the way gamification has crept into so many vestiges of life. That's a big question.
That's a great question. Gamification is almost like a buzzword in every field, and has been for the last maybe decade. I think that gamification is a great motivator. We've been doing it forever. We just haven't called it gamification. If you think about, chore charts with stickers, in some sense, that's a form of gamification. Who doesn't love a leaderboard? Who doesn't love like the objective reflection of the work and the effort that we're putting into? So I say gamification, great. It can be a great short-term motivator, and I think that it has really enhanced, our physical health, our mental health. Think about everyone who wants to hit the 10,000 steps, right? That didn't exist before, and now we have kind of this metric and a little cheer and a little badge when we do it, 100 days in a row or whatever. So I think gamification generally, I don't see a problem with it.
I actually love the fact that there are so many companies that focus on the beneficial aspect of gamification. And for example, I was really fascinated by Foursquare, and now it's Swarm, I believe. They renamed themselves. Foursquare idea about gamification, and also Google Maps, as we know, is gamifying their app to make it more applicable and more exciting for people. That's another topic that is so wide. I think Rachel will have to invite you for another PhD. We have question from In Love and in Pain. Hi, Beata and Rachel. Games can really be beneficial to our mental health, but can sometimes give us stress when we can't move on to the next level. Do you feel it too, Rachel?
Yes. I, to this day, hate playing first-person shooters, not because I don't like the genre, but because it is really stressful for me when I just am not good at it. And I'm just constantly dying and having a really hard time. And I've told this story before, but it's so true. In games like Grand Theft Auto, you're in the game, you're kind of committing these crimes and the police come after you, and there's stars ranking how much in trouble you are. And when you get to about 2 stars, like the police release, I can't take it. I can't take the stress of them following me. And I just give the controller to somebody else. I'm like, please get them away from me. So yes, I feel it. It's frustrating, but a good game challenges us appropriately, and eventually, we get away and we get over that hurdle.
I love it. The good game challenges us appropriately. I like the fact that I actually posted on Instagram today's post, which was talking about the fact that games let us explore different avenues and bring creative solutions. So it's really beneficial, these aspects of playing games. Natalie Lanto is adding some comments. Some video games are very violent. Do you think they influence their players to be violent in real life?
The research says no. So in terms of a direct relationship between the consumption of violent video games and then behavior change, there's no evidence to suggest that. And actually, there's been hundreds, if not thousands, of studies looking at that. It's been very extensively researched, that if you look at playing a game and then right after, or playing games over time, I mean, violent video games are very popular. Millions and millions and millions of people play them. And if you look at violent trends over time, actually violent trends have gone down, the amount of crime that's being committed. So there's no direct relationship, but it is something that commonly gets kind of scapegoated in the media when something terrible happens. But there's an example that Chris Ferguson, he's a professor at Stetson University. He likes to say, saying a violent perpetrator of crime played video games is like saying he wore shoes. Like, it's so ubiquitous now in our culture that somebody would play video games. So my short answer is no. I know I just gave a long answer.
It's interesting because I think there are some people trying to replicate Grand Theft Auto with their trying to escape the police squad somewhere in the roads of San Francisco. But you say it is not the case. So why do you say that? What is the research really showing us?
Well, your example is a little different. So your example would be something that would be more under a heading of called like gamification of violence, which would be behaving in a violent way that seems somehow inspired by the content within video games. And that's slightly a different beast. I'll put that over there for a minute. But the direct relationship between behavior change, because what the question is asking is, if I'm consuming violent media, is that somehow changing my behavior in a way in which I am now committing violent crime? But our brains are really good at differentiating real violence from simulated violence. And the example I like to give is watching a really violent movie, like a Quentin Tarantino movie. And if you watch that movie, you can think about how you feel when you're watching the violent scenes play out. But then you could also think, how would I feel if I was like right there when that was happening? And the feeling would be completely different. That's because our brain is really good at partitioning these things. I know when I play Grand Theft Auto and I'm robbing a bank, that's not going to impact my behavior in any way to want to actually physically go out and rob a bank. And when I say, what does the research say? We look at trends of amount of people who play games. We look at trends of what violent crime has been over the years. We have done studies where you look at a whole range of things like consumption of violent media, but also peer delinquency and previous exposure to violence and all those sorts of things. And when you run them in the statistical model and you look at what is impacting somebody who would commit a violent crime or somebody who has committed a violent crime, media is all but insignificant when you consider things like peer delinquency and previous exposure to violence and frustration tolerance, a low tolerance for frustration. There's a lot of other factors that are well established in the research from studies of people who have committed violent crime that make a significant impact for somebody to want to behave that way. And media is all but non-existent. Things that you're talking about, the gamification of violence, that is not my area of expertise. I am just starting to learn about that, but that's kind of a slightly different, being someone who would be prone to committing violence anyway, doing it in a way that seems inspired by the content they're consuming in the media. But we could say that too for movies and television, and games are not necessarily shown to be particularly unique in that way.
Very interesting dynamic. Thank you very much, Rachel, for honesty. Jane is saying yes to leaderboard grinding. Now, Patrick says the US SEC chairman recently expressed concern about stock market trading platforms adopting gamification concepts to promote stock trading. Any thoughts, Rachel?
They want to make money. They want to make money, and that's going to promote more engagement. Like gamification, the point of gamification is to keep somebody engaged. So yes, I could see that as being concerning, but I guess not. I don't know that much about stock trading, but I guess that's not necessarily illegal, right? The people are there to trade stocks anyway. But maybe a little manipulative.
Interesting. Well, thank you, Patrick, for giving us some food for thought. We are hoping that Rachel is going to dive into the topic and see that. Anyway, maybe new article, who knows? Absolutely. So we are back to the fact we are talking about how video games can benefit our mental health. So we talked about the fact Pokemon Go being a great game that is letting us go explore the world. Now, I know that many Pokemon goers had to be locked down, and what do you think would be your solution to those who would had to change their behavior during lockdown?
Yeah, in terms of game, well, games were a great tool during COVID lockdowns. I wrote a Medium article with the title. It was something to the effect of like, were games the saving grace of COVID-19? In the beginning, I mean, Pokemon Go, because it was a physical game where you were close to other people, obviously you couldn't be playing that. But other games and other game adjacent spaces, I want to say like Twitch, had like a 10-fold increase in the amount of people both live streaming, but also watching live streams of other people play games. Games really provided kind of the last standing, fun, interactive activity that we could participate in 6 feet away from each other as we were during the lockdown. So I think that video games were actually the saving grace, and the fact that my child could play Minecraft with her friends from school when she wasn't going to school and have that interactivity, right? That's what's different about it. It's a lot different than sitting on Zoom and having dinner with somebody. Being able to be in a shared, playful space and have those experiences together, have that sense of camaraderie, and it reinforces, friendship and, stress release and all the things that come with play. Games are really critical during COVID-19. And that's why we started to see even positive headlines. I've talked about this before. There was an article out of Good Housekeeping that said, like, playing games with your family is a great thing to do. And it's like, never thought I would live to see the day that a Good Housekeeping article would be encouraging, video game play. And we were seeing that during COVID-19.
Absolutely, especially those of us who had to look after children, and games were the only release of stress when you had to deal with work during COVID. So we have a comment from Laura Peden. I have been doing some mindset research on exactly that point, the pressure of failing in computer games comparing to failing in real life problems. What's your take on that, Rachel?
Yeah, there's a book called Video Games and Wellbeing, and I published it in 2020, and that book focused completely on the positive things you can learn from games. And one of those things is persistence through failure. So failing in computer games is great because there's very few, if any, real world repercussions to failing. And if we fail in the game and we continue to try and persist, what we learn is new creative ways of thinking. We adjust our frustration tolerance. We learn new strategies. We become creative. We become persistent. And those skills that we're learning in the games can and do transfer into our real world. So failing in games, frustrating, but also a very good learning experience and something that can benefit us in all areas of our life.
As long as you're not getting addicted. So what would you say are the signs of addiction? What are the warning signs for anybody who's playing game?
Yeah, so gaming addiction is a really popular area of research at the moment. But I think there's a differentiation that needs to be made between being clinically, what you would consider clinically addicted, and what you would consider kind of using games in a problematic way. If you're using games in a way that is negatively impacting your life, or if you're using them in a way that is causing you to not meet your responsibilities, if you're using them in a way that's making you feel bad, in that case, those would be signs that you might want to seek professional, external help. But the thing is, it's not so much about the game. When we talk about game addiction, I think the assumption is that it is something about the content of the game that is driving a problem behavior. And in the research, that actually has not been established. There hasn't been anything that's been uniquely determined about games to be in somehow addicting, like a way a chemical would be addicting. But rather, it seems much more likely that games are being used problematically because they're being used to compensate for something. They're being used to cope with something else completely. And this is a really important point, because if you go to a mental health professional and you say, I'm addicted to the games and the games are addicting, what that would lead to is, okay, take the games away, right? Because it's the game that's causing the problem. But if it's, I'm using games in a way that's causing problems in my life because I'm lonely or I'm depressed or I have high anxiety, and I'm using games as a way to cope with that, that's totally different, because then the treatment plan would be treat the depression, treat the anxiety, talk about the loneliness. So if games are in some way causing problems, or you think they are, I would seek a mental health professional that understands that games are sometimes used as tools, and sometimes those tools are being overused, because when it comes to treating whatever it is driving the issues, it's really important to look beyond the game itself, because again, the research doesn't point to the game itself being the source of the problem, but it being what they call a maladaptive coping strategy. The games have become the focus of coping with something else completely.
So is there like a game addiction withdrawal syndrome, or is that something that is happening?
Yeah, so withdrawal is a symptom of classical addiction. So if you look at the guidelines that the World Health Organization set out for game addiction, withdrawal is a component of it. But the guidelines set forward by the World Health Organization are not widely endorsed or validated as of yet by mental health professionals across the board. So if somebody is experiencing distress because they're unable to play their games, that would be a classic sign of withdrawal. But again, it might be because the games are their social outlet, or the games are the only place where they feel that they're accomplishing something, or the only place they feel free to make their own decisions, or things like that. It's not necessarily because one game is particularly good at like sucking somebody in that another game.
Well, I guess after this show, I am going to ask my husband what is his game compensating for. That's an interesting topic. Now we have Anurati Srivastra. So if consumption of violent media does not have any impact on human beings and their behaviors, what do you think about the consumption of empathy games? Would it translate to real life empathy?
So I don't think it's one for one. The consumption of violent video games, the argument is that I would consume this media and then behave in a way that is completely different to how I would have behaved had I not consumed the media. Empathy is something that most humans are capable of understanding and expressing. And if they have a desire to be a human that connects with other humans and has, social relationships, empathy is a core component of that. So I think that it is a different situation when you talk about the consumption of games that are meant to help you learn perspective taking, for instance. I think that games actually are really good at facilitating our understanding of empathy and perspective taking. And that has been validated in the research. We do see that if you play games that expose you to different thoughts and ideas and people of different backgrounds that you haven't necessarily engaged with, it can increase your ability to take on those different perspectives. Or if you embody an avatar that has a different perspective, it's kind of like Dungeons and Dragons. If you create a character that comes from a different background than you, it gives you the ability to kind of walk in their shoes, and that teaches you empathy. So I think it's not a one for one, and the research does not point to violent media changing our behavior, but it does point to empathy games translating to real world increases and improvements in perspective taking. So I've always kind of been like, follow the numbers. The numbers say empathy, yes, violence, no.
Right. I wanted to segue into the topic that Melinda Gates talked about, which is basically women were more present in technology before the games were created that were more combative, more shoot them all. Because if you will look at the original, games that were all about eating, little mechanism in a maze somewhere, they were non-violent and they were non-descriptive. They were not protruding to be male or female. So what would you say is the best outcome for these companies who are creating game to be most inclusive, to create this inclusive environment for girls and boys?
Yeah, the video game industry is not super inclusive, like historically and generally speaking. There's a report that comes out, the Developer Satisfaction Survey. It's published by the IGDA every year. And in it, they break down even like what is the number of females that are reporting, what is the number of people from minority backgrounds, all across the spectrum, across the gaming industry. And it's pretty well skewed to the Caucasian male. So for me, my advice would be to diversify the workforce, and particularly the people who are in positions of power, because you have to be more than half of a room to have your voice heard, or you have to be the person in power. So if you just hire what they call like a token female or a token LGBTQIA person, that is not going to have any sort of significant impact on the room. So it's about hiring diverse voices in positions of leadership, and also hiring more people of diverse backgrounds in your workforce.
Beautiful answer. It applies to gaming industry. It applies throughout all the factors of life and especially business. Now, let's talk about Rachel's advice for career change for all the females who want to be on top of the industry. What would you say are your
Wow.
five advices to women who want to progress in technology? What is
Yes. Thankfully, you gave me this question ahead of time so I could think about it. It was, what are the top five, soft skills for females in the industry? And it was hard to narrow it down. But I think number one would be networking. I found for me, it is almost more who you know than what you know. You can be the smartest person in the room, but they're still not inviting you into the room if you don't know somebody, to invite you in the room. So I would say talk to everybody would be number one. Number two, developing 21st century communication skills. I think that it's not often emphasized how important it is to be able to communicate yourself via an email effectively without sounding curt or rude or wrong or whatever it might be. So I think learning to communicate your ideas without nonverbal cues is really important. Number three, I would say public speaking. Public speaking is so daunting, but a lot of it is required. And the more you do it, the easier it is. Number four, time management. Learn to love your digital calendar. Schedule everything, even time off. Self-care is real important. This didn't make the list, but it should have. It's important to even schedule, Rachel's lunch so nobody books you in. And last but not least, and I think this is very important, especially for women, because research has shown women take so much more of the admin jobs and the unpaid work. Say no. If it is not absolutely yes, I would love to do that, like I thought when you invited me to come here. If it's not that, it's a no. If it's the middle of the road, it's a no. You don't have time for it. No. Only do the things that really excite you and really make you passionate, and learn to say no to those things that you just don't really want to do, because there's only so much time in the day.
Oh, absolutely. As you mentioned, females are not appreciated for taking over the work, and there is actually a research that shows that women are paid less for doing more works than their male
No good.
counterparts.
No.
Yep. There you go. So I love these soft skills, these tips from Rachel. Now, none of us are able to achieve success without some help along the way. Is there a particular person you are grateful towards? And can you share a story about that?
Yeah. My mom has always supported every decision I ever made. And I think that having a strong female advocate really helped. Because I think a lot of times, especially as females, like, I want to go into a male dominated space. I want to go get my PhD. I want to move to another country where I don't speak the language. I did all those things. And I think it's really easy to be like, are you sure? Versus like, you want to do it, you go do it. You can do anything you set your mind to. And that's how my mom has always been with me. And I think that having that has been incredibly beneficial. The story I'll share is that when I went to get my PhD, I moved to England, and I had not ever lived in another country. And I got there, and it was Northern England, and the accent was really thick, and I couldn't really understand. I hadn't adjusted yet. I wasn't able to understand anybody. And obviously the fashion was very different. And I called my mom crying like the second night there. I wasn't even on campus yet. I was still in the hotel. And I was like, what have I done? Like, what decision did I make? I don't understand anybody. Everybody looks weird and whatever. And she was like, Rachel, you can always just come back home. And that just like a little practical, like, you have the choice. Like, nobody's forcing you to stay there. You have a return ticket. Like, you could just come home. And I was like, right, okay. But knowing that I could, knowing that the support was there, just that little mindful reminder, like, you are the guider of your ship, and you can do what you want to do, and I'm here for you. It's invaluable.
It is indeed. Well done to Rachel's mom. Greetings.
She's probably watching. Hi, Mom.
Hi, Mom. Lovely to see you. Great daughter you have. Now, Rachel, you've achieved quite a lot of recognition. How do you do that? You've got 3 kids, you're looking after them, and our youngest one is 1. How do you achieve such a great balance of work and personal life?
Yeah. I live by my Google Calendar. I'm not joking. I live by my Google Calendar, and I have a very supportive spouse. And I also think that that is really key, because it's not, you only see one person here, but it takes a village of friends to support me. And the people that take this are so wonderful. I work with a group of people who are incredibly inspiring, and I wake up in the morning wanting to work with them and wanting to do more with them. And then I have a spouse who, when I say, I'm in a meeting, can you hold the baby? Always does. And so that's really helpful.
Oh, great. Well, I have to say that I loved your comment about saying yes to our live stream. Now, I like to always ask at the end of the show a question about imagine the pandemic and lockdowns are over. Who would you invite to have private breakfast with, and where would you go to?
You see, I love this question, and I want so desperately to say Henry Cavill, but I know that's not the answer you want. So I'm gonna say, the pandemic has kept me away from networking in a physical space with the other people I do research with. And there is nothing more inspiring than being in a close physical proximity with people who like nerd out on the same stuff as you. So if I was to go anywhere, I have a colleague in Austin in the University of Texas. I'm originally from Austin. So I would love to go down there. I would love to have lunch. His name is Professor Bill Swan. He's at the University of Texas. There's a little pancake place called Kirby Lane. They have fantastic chocolate chip pancakes. And I would go have lunch and talk about research and science and eat pancakes. That's what I would do.
I love that answer. I love pancakes. I hope I can invite you and tempt you with some pancakes someday.
Absolutely.
I love networking too. And speaking of networking, what could be a better episode than to watch Building the Success Networks You Need with Kelly Howie, who is actually a world author of Success Networks You Need. Rachel, it's been a great journey. I want to ask you about the book that you would choose, thinking, well, I wish I would read it before I started my career.
Yes, there's a great little book called, I want to get it right, Are We All Scientific Experts Now? It's by Henry Collins. It's a short little book from 2014, but it was very ahead of its time. And it's all about discussing, how are we all experts on global pandemics and vaccines and international politics? Like, how come we all feel like we're experts now? Because I think for me in my PhD journey, it would have really helped me overcome my imposter syndrome, because I am the literal expert of my specific niche area, but constantly feel like I'm not. All PhD students have this imposter syndrome, or even researchers. You don't have to be a student. So I think that book would have really awoken that, it's a universal experience. And if you're studying a PhD, if you are an expert on your particular thing, despite the fact that everybody feels like they're an expert on everything.
Absolutely. We had some experts on pandemic. Now we have experts on, I don't know. Anyway, I have to tell you that I actually like the fact that not only it correlates with the discussion I had with Beata Green. She's going to be our future guest in a couple of weeks' time. And she talked about the fact that she was speaking on the line, and she hated it, and she talked about it openly. She made a post on LinkedIn and she said, I was crap. And actually, I told her, it's not about perfection, it's about progress. And progress can make you an expert. And I think it's a great quotation to apply here.
Yeah, definitely.
Good. Rachel, speaking of quotations, what is your number one life lesson quote?
Yes. Thank you for asking. So I love this quote and I love sharing it. The opposite of play isn't work. The opposite of play is depression. And this is a quote from Dr. Stuart Brown from the National Institute of Play. And I think it really goes towards fostering this idea of play is important. Taking time off is important. It's not just about working all the time. And a lot of times we think the opposite of play is work. If we're not working, we're playing. No, it's very important that we have this time to be frivolous and to be free and to be silly and to be funny. Because the opposite of play is depression. So let's all remember to be a little more playful. Pick up that Pokemon Go, play a little Stardew Valley, whatever it is you're into these days. Games are great vehicles for play. And we should all be, a little bit more playful.
I love that. Thank you very much for that encouragement, Rachel. Sometimes life is like a video game. That's another quote brought to us by Racy, who's actually in production today. Thank you, Racy. When things get harder and the obstacles get tougher, it just means you leveled up. Laura Pace said that great quotation. Right. I think this is all from today's show. It's been amazing, Rachel. Thank you so much. We posted your website, a link to your website. We are looking forward to your book in the future. Next week, we are going to talk about how to break the bias in tech. This is very related to games, to technology, to males, females, ethnicity, whatever the outcome is, which is creating better products in games, in technology, in future. Rachel, thank you very much for your great and very lively discussion. I would like to also thank to Jane, Alessia Król, Patrick Young, Agata Bellon, In Love and in Pain, Natalie Lanto, Laura Peden, and Anurati Srivastava. I'm hoping that I said these names right. Rachel, thank you once again for a great show. We are looking forward to talk about gamification in the future. And that's it from episode 70 of Ph.D. live stream. To stay updated and ensure you never miss a positivity hack delivered, follow Woman on It and turn on notifications to be alerted once a video has been released. So, as always, our positivity quote comes from positive thinking only and goes, look for something positive in each day. Even if some days you have to look a little harder or go through that next level of game. If you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude. As Maya Angelou says, today is your day to hack your future. Hack the positivity you want. Thank you.